So now we're going to move from being a handy conduit to a playful maverick. All right, so rule number 5. A dash is used to set apart what we call a sentence appositive. So pay close attention to this one. So whereas an appositive is traditionally a noun that renames another single noun, we can also have in the English language what we call a sentence appositive, where a noun that basically it's a noun that renames or encapsulates the entire sentence. So true, a sentence appositive may be set apart with a comma, as we'll see, but to differentiate it from a regular or a simple appositive, you can actually use the dash instead. Let me show you what I mean. Here's an example of a regular appositive, something that I'm sure we all know. The Beatles proved themselves to be brilliant musicians with their album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, their quintessential masterpiece. Well, in this case, the word Sergeant or masterpiece is basically renaming the title of their album, which was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And so if I were going to put this on a sentence diagram, I would see that the word masterpiece, once again, is simply in parentheses, and it's renaming the title of that album. So this is an appositive. It's a noun renaming another noun. And oftentimes we'll use a comma to sort of separate it because this is, once again, what we'd call a non-essential appositive. If I want to make a sentence appositive, it's a little different. If I said Paul announced on April 10th, 1970, that he was leaving the Beatles, a decision that rocked the music world. Well, what I've created here is an appositive, like decision, but it's not renaming one single noun in the main sentence. Decision isn't renaming Beatles. Beatles aren't a decision. April 10th is not a decision. Paul is not a decision, but it's renaming the entire sentence. It's renaming the fact that Paul announced that he was leaving. So therefore, it's an appositive of the entire sentence. And that's what we mean by a sentence appositive. So therefore, decision is the appositive of the entire sentence. And so you can use a comma, but you're allowed and should use a dash to differentiate it from a traditional appositive. So we say dash a decision that rocked the music world. Another example. Controversial album cover for Yesterday and Today had the Beatles dressed as butchers with slabs of raw meat and dismembered baby dolls. A subtle jab at Capitol Records, whom they felt were, quote, butchering their music. Once again, the word jab, a subtle jab, using it as a noun, is not simply renaming butchers. The butchers aren't the jab, but rather the entire statement that the album cover had them dressed as butchers. That whole thing is a subtle jab. So once again, another example of what we would consider to be a sentence appositive. So this becomes that sentence appositive, and therefore I like the dash. So remember that it's always going to be a dash, but never a comma and a dash. That's always an incorrect choice. Rule number 6, a dash may pair with the conjunction and in order to give more emphasis to a coordinate pairing. Now we're getting more into sort of a stylistic sort of rhetoric side of grammar. So a pair of words or phrases, which we call a coordinate pair, is often joined by a coordinating conjunction like and to kind of show that both halves of the pairing are equally important. But sometimes you want to actually stress the second half more than the first half. So you can use what we call a dash and in order for it to actually emphasize the second half more than the first half. I said the song Twist and Shout was a hit with live audiences and with John's voice, which had to be rested for at least a song or two in order to recover. Well, in this case, that word and is actually joining two prep phrases. In the way it's punctuated right now, both prep phrases are equally important. What that means is you could also switch the order around and say Twist and Shout was a hit with John's voice and with live audiences. They're both equally important. And therefore, we would just simply leave it as it is. But what if it actually hits harder on John's voice than on the fans? What if I want to really hit that second prep phrase more than the first prep phrase? Well, one thing I could do as a writer is I can use a dash and. So if I said the song Twist and Shout was a hit with live audiences and with John's voice, just by adding that dash and is now my way of hitting that second half more than the first half and giving it more emphasis. So now we're focusing more on the fact that it's Strange John's voice as opposed to why it was such a hit with live audiences. So this is a stylistic choice. English grammar is a little weird. So this rule works only with the word and. There is no dash but, there is no dash yet. And I don't know why, that's just how it is in the English grammar. Rule number 7, a pair of dashes may be used to give special emphasis to a parenthetical phrase. So dashes work sort of like parentheses. They separate a phrase or they separate a list from the rest of the sentence. But a dash has a little bit of a different connotation. So a parentheses is more subtle, understated. So if you're reading a sentence with parentheses, it's a little quieter. Where a dash, I want you to remember that a dash is very loud. It seems to shout or highlight for attention. So this is the only exception when you may not have a full sentence in front of the dash, just because you're kind of interrupting the middle of a sentence with something you're trying to highlight. I said for the Help album cover, the Beatles had to adjust their arm positions, which actually spelled out NUJV in semaphore, which is a language, in order to be more aesthetically artistic. So people always thought that they spelled out the word help, but they're not. They're spelling out NUJV. Now, the commas are traditionally placed here to separate that adjective clause. You could also use parentheses, and if you did that, that would make it a little bit more subtle. You'd read it a little softer. The Beatles had to adjust their arm positions, which actually spelled out NUJV in semaphore, in order to be more aesthetically artistic. But dashes actually are a way of actually highlighting it, really giving it emphasis to say, hey, here's my point. Putting in dash is like saying, hey, the Beatles had to adjust their arm positions, which actually spelled out NUJV in semaphore in order to be more aesthetically artistic. So it's just, once again, a stylistic choice. But you'll notice we'll put dashes on both sides. In terms of the SAT, what they'll do is they'll give you a dash on one side and maybe a comma on the other side. We have to recognize that as being incorrect. Last rule for us, a dash may be used to indicate an abrupt change in thought. So unlike some other punctuation options, this grammar maverick allows the sentence to make a very abrupt change in thought and structure. So this is a much better choice to indicate a hesitation in the sentence than the tragic and often common misuse of ellipses. I hate ellipses. I hate them. So when I want to change direction, I don't put an ellipses in. I do a dash. It's like a hard 90 degree, 180 degree spin in the middle of your sentence. Fans in the UK were known to toss soft jelly babies at George Harrison because his favorite candy wasn't available in the States. Girls in America innocently would pelt him with jelly beans during concerts. I want to focus on the first half, that they would toss these soft jelly candies at him, but in the United States, they couldn't find jelly babies, so they threw jelly beans at him. And the dash is a way of kind of giving me a real interesting contrast between those two halves of the sentence. So therefore, here they are throwing these little jelly babies at him. Boing! Look at him go! Nom, 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 nom. All right, to wrap it all up then, handy conduit, a playful maverick. All right, so despite its handiness, the dash is not to be overused though. All right, I overuse it and I'm aware of that. I'm not Emily Dickinson, who's allowed to overuse the dash because she is a brilliant poet. But rather, I want you to let it make its presence purposefully. Let it be used for a reason. Sometimes, remember, less is more in your punctuation. All right, so embrace its playful side by calling upon it over a traditional comma. Use it instead of the parentheses. And my goodness, use it instead of the awful ellipses. And along with the other Fab Four, the dash can be just the help you're looking for as a writer. That's all, everybody. Thank you for listening.